This is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Küstenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our future. In today's episode, we're going to discuss what Australia will look like in 40 years' time, and maybe even why you should care. You see, last year, Treasurer Jim Chalmers handed down the latest Intergenerational Report. These 5-yearly reports from the federal government predict what the country is going to look like in 40 years' time, and also the state of the nation's finances. So I'm keen to find out what it says about our future and whether we should even believe it. Simon, as a demographer, you must love it when these reports come out.
I do indeed like the concept of an intergenerational report a lot, because what it does, it just forces the Australian public, the Australian politicians, once every 5 years at the very least, to look into the future and take the longitudinal view. That's, of course, something that I would do on a daily basis, but that's my weird job that I'm in. But it does help us to lift the head high and really understand what's coming, and then to ensure that our policies that we're setting right now, that they actually take the long-term perspective in view. Because if we don't do this, we create so many problems. Australia has no shortage of, from an urban planning perspective, I can tell you stories left, right, and center where we missed the boat 40 years ago, where we should have done something 40 years ago for very predictable changes, and then we didn't do it. I'm in Melbourne. Melbourne is right now building for billions upon billions of dollars a suburban rail loop. This is a loop that goes around the boring suburbs, and this loop should have been built 40 years ago, because there is no way that a big city operates without a rail loop. You knew this, but it's, of course, it's always expensive. But the longer you wait, the more expensive this build gets and the more problems you create along the way. And that's just one example. I don't want to bag Melbourne out here, but this is the idea. We know certain challenges are coming and we could act right now. Sometimes finances are the issue. We cannot finance that much stuff then, but sometimes solutions might be much, much easier.
Well, we'll look into that, Simon. I know that a while ago then a bunch of economists and others, they put their collective heads together and they gave us this intergenerational report, seeing where Australia is going to be in 2063. But I guess, surprise, surprise, it wasn't all good news, was it?
Well, not necessarily, no.
It's going to be a very different country from the one we know today. We're going to be older. Economy is going to slow a bit, they're suggesting. So let's look into each of those things one by one. Maybe we'll start with the population. Australians are expected to live longer and spend more years in full health. We've spoken about that a couple of times in previous podcasts, haven't we?
Exactly. And that is good news. Because why the hell would you want to live longer if you are in poor health, if you're suffering? That's not what you want. And that's clear. That's good. That's positive development. That is also something that you would expect from a rich country that grows older. That's good that you increase full health. Absolutely positive development. No two opinions about this, but this already points to a couple of mega trends that are coming our way, with baby boomers aging. Baby boomers will be part of this aging cohort in full health. So far they reinvented every stage of the life cycle they ever touched. And so they will do the same with aging. They will also do the same with dying. Because if you have more assistant, more generous, if you will, more flexible assistant dying policies in there, this ensures by definition that you can avoid your own poor health. And if I read the baby boomer cohort, this very individualistically and value-driven, idealistic generation correctly, they will ensure that they have more of a say in their own death than previous generations, which statistically speaking should translate to less time spent in poor health at the very extreme end of life.
So you're saying they're going to have more say in their deaths? I know Pam, my wife, has already said she wants to go out on a Harley. Only a couple of nights ago, we were talking about it, having seen a movie. And so we actually haven't spoken about that. But as people in our 70s, we probably should. It's one of those conversations people don't like having. So we're going to live longer and hopefully more healthy. Australia's population is not going to grow as fast over the next 40 years as it has up to now, is it, Simon?
Yes, that also has to, we in that case measure the pace of population growth in percentages, by how many percentage points do you grow your population year after year. And as the country grows, even if you keep the total population growth in absolute numbers relatively stable, the relative growth number goes down. That is a given. That is not necessarily bad news. And I would always look at the migration number from a very pragmatic perspective. How many workers do we import from overseas to ensure that we fill all of the vacancies in our most important sectors? So that lowers, but that's just a mathematical number. I would expect population growth to roughly occur at the same rate in the future.
Well, it took us 200 years, Simon, to get to 25 million people. We're now 27 million people, but the population is forecast to reach 40 million, 40.5 million in just under 40 years. So as we've said in previous podcasts, the government's got a business plan to do this. And last week we discussed why it's not going to change its immigration policies, and immigration or migration is really going to contribute to a large part of this population growth.
Exactly. So since migration makes up 2/3 of population growth, more or less at the moment, we know that any kind of movement in that number will make the world of a difference for the whole setup of the country. So that's coming. But it's of course somewhat predictable where this migration will come from. It will continue to come from the countries that have young people. We said that migration is a young person's game. In the 50s and 60s, we took in heaps of young migrants, technically speaking, unskilled migrants from Italy and Greece, because we needed to build the country. These were countries with a big young population and no jobs. So those folks went to Australia where we had jobs. That was wonderful. But now the European countries don't have any young people left. They are aging like crazy. So we can't grab young European people into the country. It's utterly impossible. And we don't have any ethnic goal or strategy in our migration or population growth narrative. So we just take them from countries where young people are. And that is Asia. These are people that are closer to home, easy commute, so to speak. And that's where we will come from. So we also know then how the ethnic makeup of Australia will be changing time over time. We know that this will be hated by quite a few people. They will controversially discuss this. They say this change is happening too fast or whatever it is. But I would argue it's inevitable and we better deal with it.
Well, we know we need the population to grow through immigration. Are people still going to want to come to Australia, Simon? Who's our competition?
Well, our competition are all the rich countries and all the safe countries. People move because they don't feel safe or because they want to become richer in a country. Sometimes they move for love. So that's that. And as long as we are a safe, stable, rich democracy, where's our competition? How many countries fall into that category? Increasingly right now, people look at the US, powerhouse, global superpower, super rich, whatever, and go, oh, that country looks a bit bonkers. How about I want a more politically stable and sane country? So in a sense, the whole political unrest in the US might work in Australian favor, and meaning more people consider Australia rather than the US. And so we get a bigger pool of migrants to pick and choose from.
I guess Canada would be another alternative, and New Zealand to a much lesser extent being much smaller.
Yeah, totally. And people are, when people move abroad, they do not necessarily say, oh, I want to go to Australia. Some people do, but they want a better life. And they have a list of countries they consider. And then they have pros and cons for each of those countries. and we want to be attractive. One of the problems that we have is stupendously expensive housing. So that, of course, detracts from our attractiveness. If I'm a young person, I go like, oh, this is my career here. I can earn $100,000, whatever. Can earn $200,000 if I have a high-paying job. But where would I live? It's like all of a sudden, none of my money stays with me. I all spend it on someone else's mortgage by renting some stupid, shitty apartment in the middle of nowhere or something like this. That's not attractive then. So we want to make sure the housing affordability piece of the puzzle ensures that we continue to be an attractive migration nation.
Well, in the old days, in the 50s, 60s, we actually used to have a system, a pound POM, where people were given money and made it easy to come and incentivized to come to Australia. At the moment, we've got a queue of people wanting to come here. Very few countries have got that. Do you think it'll ever get to the stage where we're going to have to give incentives for people to come?
I'm certain that we will, demographically speaking, because the world is running out of people of migration age, 18 to 39-year-olds. In about 15 years, we are peaking, globally speaking, the sheer number of people that are 18 to 39, what I consider migration age. So that means more and more countries will compete for those people. So you need to offer more goodies for those people to come to your country. So that means tax cuts and so forth would be the easiest way of incentivizing people. Maybe we do cash handouts. Maybe we pay for flights. Maybe we make visas free. Whatever it is, we'll come up with a couple of levers to attract more people.
Moving forward, our economy is going to change as well. And I'd like to have a quick look at maybe some of the industries that are going to change. But the Intergenerational Report suggested that our economy is projected to grow 2.5 times larger and real incomes by around 50% higher between now and 40 years or so. But like other advanced economies, our economy is going to grow a little bit more slowly moving forward than it did in the past.
Yes, absolutely. But and of course, forecasting the economy of a mining nation is very hard as well, because if nickel prices and iron ore prices double, then all of a sudden our biggest export sector is technically speaking twice as big, even though the same number of workers produce the same amount of stuff, but we get paid a bucket load for it. So in our setup, we very much depend on global pricing of agricultural goods and mining goods. So forecasting that, we always then use a medium scenario, so the middle scenario of heaps of scenarios. So that's actually the harder part to forecast. It's much easier to forecast the total number of people and then draw conclusions from this. But how much the economy grows, we are so dependent on global markets for how big we go. We don't manufacture all that much. We don't drive any economy through our own ingenious ways. We just sell the stuff that we have to the world.
Well, decarbonisation, Simon, of the transport industry, and I guess changing consumer preferences, worrying about global warming and being more green, that could erode revenue from fuel tax. And I don't know how much the government makes out of tobacco excise. I've actually never smoked. I've done a whole lot of very stupid things in my life, but I've actually never smoked. But I believe a packet of cigarettes is very, very expensive, and a huge amount of that's tobacco excise. I wonder what's going to happen to that. And every time I go to the petrol bowser, I know a huge portion of that is government taxes. I wonder whether our base of government revenue is going to change.
Well, the government is a very pragmatic business, so to speak. They go, where the hell do I get my money from? And are we getting enough taxable income out of our mining products as this country? Many people would say no. Many people say we are being screwed over in there by the big corporations, meaning we do not get enough for each cubic megaton or whatever it's called, however we measure gas exports. So this type of stuff is difficult. That's the easiest way of making money, is to tax stuff that we will definitely sell. And of course, the tobacco thing that was, yes, it's an income source of a way, but it's a double income source because yes, you make a bit of money by selling tobacco, but by de-incentivizing people to smoke, you save an awful lot of money in the medical system. And we did really completely wean people off smoking. We have the most successful public health campaign that you could imagine. We were a high smoking country. We completely diminished smoking. Marvelous success. But then innovation hit that sector and vapes came up online. All of a sudden with vaping, we have a catastrophic pandemic levels of smoking among our young people. They don't call it smoking, call it vaping. It's god awful for the environment with all the little batteries and whatever. And again, we now try to regulate this. Regulation follows innovation is always a forecasting mantra. And we'll bit by bit try to replicate the cigarette playbook on vapes. But that's one way. And we'll see this in the future, that a new thing emerges out of nowhere. It has positive impacts, it has negative impacts, and we then try to regulate it. And we've seen this in many different industries, and in forecasting, it's always fun. Something pops up, Airbnb, Uber, an innovation. It goes berserk. It throws property markets out of whack. It destroys the taxi industry. But then bit by bit we realize maybe a bit more regulation is needed. And then the couple of years after the fact, we start adjusting.
Well, Simon, you'd be disappointed if I didn't talk about some of the property changes over the next 40 years. So we're talking about what the Intergenerational Report is suggesting. And if you think that we're going to have a population of around 40 million people, if you were a visitor from overseas and came back today, 10 years later, you wouldn't recognise our cities. I think it's going to be very much the same again. We're going to densify, more medium and high density dwellings. Our cities are going to expand. And I think just the way we live is going to mean we're still going to be living in the big capital cities. And yes, there'll be some large regional centres around, but the sort of accommodation we're going to live in will be a bit different too. We've spoken in previous episodes of the Demographics Decoded podcast about our ageing population, how most are going to retire in their own homes. So we're going to have a renovation boom. We're also going to have a building boom. But I think in general, people are going to trade backyards for balconies and courtyards, Simon.
Yes. If we live in big cities, you will not have your own garden. This makes no sense at scale. So the built environment will adjust bit by bit slowly to this. And hopefully we're being smart about the demographic changes, and we're building what we would call whole of life type dwellings, where you can actually retire in your dwelling, where from the get-go you plan a bathroom that then can be adjusted for mobility needs later on. It doesn't need to look it right away, but for example, how wide is a door of a bathroom? Make it wide enough from the get-go. Doesn't cost much more, but the amount of money it saves later on is quite lucrative. So that's the type of stuff that I'm thinking about. Developers, builders take these things into consideration from the get-go. It's just thinking a bit more longitudinally. So that should be coming. If I look at the property market 40 years into the future, I think we'll not be building housing the same way. So if you go to any greenfield site across Australia, you look at how we're building housing there. Is that the smartest way to build housing with all the collective intelligence of mankind put together? Probably not. You probably go, it would be much smarter to manufacture housing, to move housing from the construction sector to the manufacturing sector. And we could, with smart machines, we could build wall elements with much less skilled labor. We could do it faster. We could eliminate the material waste, which is crazy high on a building site. So we build housing faster, better, cheaper. And they then only need to be legoed together on site, but they would be developed, those housing elements, in a way that you just more or less click them together. You would speed up the development process. No bad weather to rain out or things. It's more comfortable to build in a factory rather than at 40 degrees in Australian summer. So that's the type of stuff that I'm certain will come. It's just a matter of who bankrolls it, because even a big player like a Lendlease or a Mirvac, they don't have the cash to really, really revolutionize manufactured housing. So someone like a bank, someone like a state, a federal government would need to bankroll it in a way.
I agree with you. I'm sure there's going to be changes and innovation. One of the things that's often discussed is productivity. If we're wanting our economy to do well, productivity has to increase. And according to the Generational Report, productivity growth is assumed to grow by 1.2% a year, around the average of the past 20 years. Interestingly, when this report was written, it was written before ChatGPT and AI became a big thing. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to the future path of productivity. It's probably not a foregone conclusion, Simon.
No, it's not. And forecasting never is. And when you write a big forecasting report like this, you have so many variables that are crucial. And say, the productivity growth is a number that you just plonk into a spreadsheet, and from this many things flow. And say, yeah, well, roughly the 20-year long average, that'll do in forecasting. But that, of course, would ignore potential developments. And in Australia, I would always encourage businesses, big and small, to be heavily investing into automation, AI, robotics, to really rethink the way you work and think, where can I become more productive? Do not shy away from capital costs. I think you'll find people to finance this, to bankroll this. But that's how you win market share, and you win market share in a growing country. The rising tide does lift all boats, and you're then being swept along, so to speak. So there's plenty of opportunities there. But again, it's always the people that are at least to a degree bold that make the big bucks.
I think another factor we've spoken about before, our ageing population, is that it's going to increase service-based economies. We've already spoken in the past about care and support services, but I think tourism and just baby boomers spending, well, baby boomers are probably not going to last another 40 years, even though I hope some of us do. But that's going to change our economy, or the shape of our economy moving forward.
Yes, and of course, as we are aging, we began this talk here about how you have longer years in good health as you grow older. And we have a bigger share of the workforce sitting in what we would call knowledge jobs. So jobs that require a laptop and your brain. And these jobs can easily be done into your 60s and 70s. That you can't be a brickie at 75. That's ludicrous. It's such a hard, physically demanding job. You cannot lay bricks at 75. But at 75, you can easily write and think. That still works. You're actually better. Huh? You might not be able to pull the long, tough all-nighters or whatever, but you can definitely hang out in the workforce for longer. And so we're already seeing this play out. I call this the end of the gold watch retirement, where, gold watch on a Friday and then it's golf course until you drop. That's not what's happening now. More and more people slowly slide into retirement. They reduce their hours, 4 days, 3 days per week, 2 days. Maybe they then go on a Rhine River cruise and take a long holiday in the middle of the year. And at some point in their late 60s and early 70s, quite a few retirees cannot actually tell you whether or not they are retired. Because I draw down on my retirement savings, yes, but I'm also still kind of sort of doing a bit of work. So am I retired? I don't know. And we'll see more and more of this.
Yes. So we're talking about the Intergenerational Report and what Australia is going to look like in 40 years. I've got a couple more questions I'd like to ask you, and then we're going to maybe look at some of the things that may not be as good over the next 40 years. But if you're watching this or listening to this, please let me give a shameless plug for you to stop for a second and click the subscribe button on whatever podcast app you're listening to or on YouTube. And do Simon and me a favour. We're wanting to share this information with as many Australian business people, entrepreneurs, investors as possible to help Australia understand what our future holds. So tell somebody about the Demographics Decoded podcast, especially if you're enjoying it. And if you're not enjoying it, especially tell them why shouldn't they have the same pleasures as you're having at the moment. So, Simon, I think one of the other things that's going to be changing with, I guess, this net zero and climate change is Australia has built its economy on mining, as you've mentioned a couple of times, on agriculture, on education and tourism. But the mining industry, are we going to still be exporting coal? I guess lithium could well take its place, but our economy and how we sell things as a country is likely to have altered over the next few decades till we get to 2060.
If we look at a couple of our mining exports, they will go through the roof because they're needed in batteries, lithium, whatever, nickel, wonderful. But if we look at something like coal, of course, is a very polluting energy source compared to solar or nuclear or even gas. Why are we still exporting it from an environmental perspective? People say we should stop it. Should we stop coal now? This is good for the environment. Let's look purely at the CO2 impact of us exporting coal, digging it out of the ground. If we were to stop exporting coal tomorrow, what would happen? Initially speaking, right away, we would see coal prices go through the roof because we're such a big exporter. That would make coal very, very expensive. If coal gets more expensive, all of a sudden, all of those really crappy deposits that are not worth digging out, those brown coal, those dirty, evil, polluting coal sorts, in Germany, for example, they become super, super lucrative. And then you will dig them out. And so the well-intended idea of making fewer CO2 emissions would actually drive up CO2 emissions because you have a dirtier energy source being exported. So we must not stop. Us stopping exporting coal will not help the climate goals. What helps the climate goals is is investing your time, your energy, your money, your career, your studies into clean energy. That is what helps. That then automatically prices coal out of the market. Stopping to dig and export coal makes it more lucrative rather than less. Super weirdly counterintuitive, but that's not going to help. So it's of course nice. You feel a bit self-righteous and positive about yourself if you can veto something and you have an enemy. An enemy is always nice to have, but it's not helping. The fact. In Australia, we have all the space that's needed to become a solar power superstar. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we invest in this? And what we should be raising is the idea of following the Norwegian approach. The Norwegians, of course, they take dirty oil out of the North Sea and they then sell it to the world and make an absolute bucket load with it. They take all those profits and throw it into their National Sovereign Wealth Fund. And with this National Sovereign Wealth Fund, they made Norway into a zero carbon market. 93% of all new cars in Norway are Teslas. It's so stupid. They all buy green luxury vehicles because they essentially are tax-free. So that's how you transition an economy. Australia could do this. This, of course, means we dig, drill, baby, drill. We sell it all to the world, but we need to capture this wealth and we then need to use this wealth in a smart way. That's what we're not doing well enough at the moment. If I'm looking ahead 40 years, this is what I would wish for Australia to do.
As I read through the Intergenerational Report last year, and to be honest, I read the summary, I didn't read the whole lot, there was also some bad stuff, things we've discussed before in this show. The health budget's a ticking time bomb for Canberra's budget deficit, aged care outlays will be a further burden. So we every now and then hear about government debt. It seems like government debt's going to keep rising, and slower economic growth is also going to make the debt blow out. At the same time, there could be difficulty collecting taxes because maybe we're not going to have the fuel excise and we won't have the petrol guzzling cars, like you said, or the tobacco excise. We won't have the coal and gas overseas sales to balance our budgets. So there's going to be a number of losses to our budgets, but someone's going to have to pay for all this, Simon. So I can see the government's only going to tax us more, possibly in different ways.
Yes, and of course, when we take all of this together, this is where the productivity talk comes in. You go like, hey, if we have all those many more costs, how about all of our worker bees in the country would magically become much more productive? And so that's where we need to honestly rethink about our economy, because Australia has been complacent. Australia has been falling in all of those fun rankings like Global Innovation Index, Global Complexity Indexes, and so forth. We run a very simplistic show, and we've gotten lazy because the boring stuff that we've been doing delivered massive wealth. But we need to make sure that we can do all of this good stuff with fewer workers to become more efficient. And that then in turn would actually create more taxable income. It would create more economic growth. All of this stuff would flow from that. But how do we finance this? Yeah. So this is when I always urge all of my business clients and my consulting work and my presentations. I said, invest into those things now. This is the time to be bold, because as long as a country grows, as long as the population base grows, tick, tick in Australia, you can massively increase your operations. But you need to make sure that you do this with fewer workers, not because you want to hire and then fire workers like Gordon Gekko in the 1980s or something like this. None of that. You want to make sure that you utilize your labor better, because we're running out of workers. And we could do it.
Now, Simon, a moment ago you mentioned about your consulting work and your presentations. People may not understand that the Demographics Group, you actually consult and give presentations to industries all around Australia. So each week we're going to leave a link in the show notes for how you can speak to Simon and his team about having him speak for you. And I know you prepare presentations specifically for industry. So we're talking in a very general way here. But what sort of industries have you helped, and what sort of clients have you found get benefit from this?
Well, that's the fun stuff about demographics, is that you can absolutely pinpoint data for each geography and each industry. So you have a very individualized narrative for each of them. Yeah, obvious industries that I'm working with are healthcare is a lot at the moment, housing, lots of retail as well, but also local governments who need to know how their local area is actually changing and what they could do in order to, shift certain population profiles. How do we attract young people? How do we attract young workers? What do we do? How do we fix our housing crisis? These are quite a few of the standard challenges that I get.
Well, there's going to be a link in the show notes to have a chat with Fiona and Simon's team about getting him to speak to your industry and see how you can plan for your futures as well, because that's the aim of it all. So, Simon, in my mind, the Intergenerational Report wasn't really a waste of time or money, because it got us thinking about what might happen and how we could prepare for it. I think hopefully it's also going to stimulate some people to think outside the square. We are going to have to do things differently, and that'll help change those inevitably bad situations into positive learning experiences. And I know while people worry about things day to day and over time, I've been around long enough to realise that a lot of the worries that you had were forgotten. Many of the things you were concerned about never really happened. In my mind, humanity's genius surprises us. Life goes on, Simon.
It does. And lifting the head can help you a lot to see more opportunities and to also see the shimmers of hope that you need. If you're down in the dumps, you automatically only look at the miserable moment right now. But as long as you can lift ahead and you can see a bit of light at the horizon, everything improves. And so this is almost a bit a philosophical argument here, that this longitudinal data helps a country to become more optimistic about its own future and to actually see all of the good things that occur here, rather than being utterly pessimistic about your own future.
Well, Simon, I look forward to catching up with you again next week to discuss how demographics is going to change our future.
Same here. Looking forward to logging on again.
This Demographics Decoded podcast was brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property and wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. You can follow me on social media, but I suggest you also follow Simon Kirstenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all the social media platforms. I'll include links in the show notes. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Demographics Decoded podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. You'll be doing them a favour. I hope you will anyway, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to shape their future. And of course, any of the discussion we had today was not personal advice about your future, but just general information to help inform you.